Up next, there are rock stars and then there are rock gods. A brand new book out now called Rock Gods, Icons of Rock Music. Over 20 artists, including duos, who make the book. Is your favorite rocker on the list? Find out.
We're totally booked.
Rock and roll!
Well, I think I'll leave you to your reading.
Little Hand says it's time to rock and roll.
Rock and roller!
We are totally booked.
Welcome back to Booked on Rock, the podcast for those about to read and rock. My name is Eric Senich. Our guest is Kathy McCabe, author of the new book, Rock Gods, Icons of Rock Music. Kathy, thank you so much for being here.
My absolute pleasure, Eric.
So there are 17 individual artists and 5 duos covered in the book. So let's start with what defines a rock god. What makes them stand out among their peers?
I think it's, you could quote stats until the cows come home, but I think we can all agree that there's that X factor. There's that charisma and, sexuality that goes hand in hand with a voice and a performance and musical skills. A lot of the rock gods play themselves. They're not just the singers at the front of the band or solo artists. So I think it's that semi quantifiable mix of all the magic that you kind of see come to bear with these people.
And you say most rock gods seem to be fueled by the experiences of a troubled childhood, but then on the other end, that leads them down a path to self-destruction, right? I mean, that seems to be the case with at least some of the names on this list. It is interesting.
It's a fascinating sort of microcosm, I guess, of where society is at. And to a certain degree, society kind of expected this behavior. So there was a bit of fulfilling the prophecy a lot of the time. But yeah, I do think that when you look, a lot of them, particularly out of Britain, were brought up by their grandparents, particularly in the 50s and 60s when divorce started becoming, something that was accepted in society. You had all these fractured families and grandparents would step into the breach, much as they do now, I would suggest. So a lot of them were fueled. I think Keith Richards in particular was fueled by his grandfather's love of music, and his grandfather was very much, the cheerleader of his talent early in the piece, and made him work for it too, which I thought was really kind of beautiful, sort of hiding the guitar up on the top shelf, as sort of, the thing that he could aspire to grab down and play one day.
Yeah. And it's also a lot of times they're just looking to bust out of this life that they're living where they kind of feel like they are restricted.
Yeah, I think with Bruce Springsteen, that was very much the case. I mean, he had such a fractious relationship with his father who was suffering depression and obviously incredibly unhappy with his life, but also battling, mental illness, which again, wasn't exactly on the mainstream radar in terms of it's something that could be treated, something that could be addressed. And as Springsteen has said in his book, and also, in Springsteen on Broadway, that was something that came, and we've seen most recently in the film, it's something that he has battled with his whole life, but with the benefit of, those around him, or just knowing that depression is an illness that can be treated. He seems to have come out of it certainly less scathed than a lot of the rock gods that we've seen.
Elvis Presley leads off the book, and he really set the template for those who followed right up until today. Talent looks, some controversy doesn't hurt, right? It only makes him more popular. And you say, quote, Elvis Presley was the first rock god. He may still be the best. Why do you feel that way?
I think you have to view it through the prism of the times and just how seismic his arrival, into what music was then. You had then you had sort of the nascent, you know, black scene, the Chitlin circuit, where you had Little Richard, James Brown, everybody. Well, James Brown sort of came a little bit later, but there wasn't, everything else was kind of crooners, you know. It was Frank Sinatra or Pat Boone or you know, Dean Martin and these guys. So for this young guy, like, he was so young when he started. I think he was 19 when he stuck his head in at Sun Studios. So to have this full package of the looks and just the natural way he moved, which of course caused huge amounts of controversy, to the extent that police, you know, were monitoring his movements, courtesy of a Florida judge who said, you know, he had to stand still and he would wag his finger vigorously as a way to kind of, you know, combat their rather conservative attempt to shackle him. But the songs as well of that time, the way that they were driven in terms of the R&B rhythms and just the unique melodies that he was sort of taking his voice into areas that people hadn't heard before, but underpinned with those R&B melodies, R&B rhythms. It was incendiary. It was clearly something that nobody had ever heard.
Chapters on James Brown, Johnny Cash follow. And then we get into the classic rock era, chapter 4 on John Lennon, who was an Elvis fan, like so many. And you write, quote, John Lennon revolutionized popular music. He may not have invented the art form, but the English singer, songwriter, poet, and artist forged its boldest frontiers. Talk about what made John Lennon a rock god and how he differs from somebody like Elvis in terms of being outspoken on social and political issues.
I think the fact that John Lennon was British born had a lot to do with that. There's that kind of innate sort of kicking against authoritarianism. There's, you know, growing up in that post-war era where, you know, everyone was struggling for survival. Again, broken home. You know, his mother was killed so tragically, you know, hit by a car when she was walking back home after visiting him. But the thing, like, if Elvis was the microcosm of what was happening in America with rock and roll, I think John Lennon, and obviously with Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and later Ringo, were the sort of lightning bolt moment in the UK. And it's interesting because Elvis didn't tour the world. He never set foot out of America, whereas the Beatles, you know, got out of the UK as quickly as possible. First to Germany, Hamburg, where they fine-honed both their performance, their musicianship, writing just constantly, absolutely constantly. And this is the other thing about Lennon too, is he was all band members were so prolific. I mean, you think about those schedules of those early tours in the US and the UK, and then through Europe. I mean, you know, and it's still something that you know, songwriters battle with now, is when do you carve out that time to write that next hit? But they were just on it, just perfecting that 3-minute pop song that was just catchy as hell. The lyrics felt like they just, you know, had been plucked from everybody's brain because we could all resonate and relate to what they were singing about, notwithstanding later on in the career with Sgt. Pepper's and Yellow Submarines and things like that. But he had the magic formula that, you know, can only come from, I think, a combination of innate songwriting gift, but the 10,000 hours, you know, they just wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote. And as we've seen in the amazing Peter Jackson films and everything else, you know, the creative process could be just in that millisecond of strumming a guitar and voila, a song arrived.
Yeah. And then we see how rapidly they advance from that point on, like Revolver moving forward, you see it.
And you think about, like, they were putting out, particularly in those first few years, they were putting out, 1, 2, 3 albums a
It's
year.
crazy. Yeah. And touring.
And touring as well. And you think about now, like, the joke about Chinese democracy, with Guns N' Roses, that we waited, how many decades was it for that? 13 years, was it? Something like that.
It was something like that. It was, I think, what Spaghetti Incident was like 1994 or 5. And then we got that album finally in, I don't know, what was it, 2000? And boy, we'd have to look it up. It was a long time.
Yeah, no, I just got a blank on that too, because we waited so long for it. But that's the interesting thing about this period, because Bowie was exactly the same. I mean, he was putting out 2, 3 records a year, certainly in the sort of from late 60s to through to the late 70s.
Spaghetti Incident 1993, Chinese Democracy 2008.
15 years.
I mentioned up top that there are 5 duos covered in the book. The first of the 5 would be Mick Jagger and Keith Richards. Now, this is interesting. Had you thought about picking one over the other, and what led to deciding to go with a partnership scenario, specifically here with Jagger Richards?
Because their partnership is the Rolling Stones. I mean, if they'd not met on that train station, having gone to primary school, lost touch, they were neighbours, lost touch. Mick's heading to the London School of Economics, Keith is heading to art school, and they just happen to meet on this train station at that minute, and Keith's holding the records under his arm, which, got was it Mick? Sorry, now I've completely confused them.
I think it was Mickey had the blues records.
Yeah, it was Mick had the blues records, and Keith was fascinated by the fact that he had these particular records. The other thing that really made me want to keep them together as a partnership is because it's one of the most fascinating dynamics in terms of a partnership in contemporary rock history. I mean, they're such different people, and we've come to see caricatures of their character, sort of evolve over the decades. It was, Mick was the serious businessman. He bristles about that kind of simplistic caricature of him. Keith was, the rock and roll outlaw. He descended far more into addiction than Mick ever did, and battled, heroin for years, got arrested all over the place on several occasions, and finally, got his act together. But the fractiousness of their partnership, the fact that, once Mick started going solo and Keith found that to be such an affront, even though it gave him free rein to be in charge of the Rolling Stones for the first time as kind of, the leader, because Mick was off doing this. He felt it was a real betrayal of the band. He was furious about it. So that kind of dynamic of how they fight like brothers, but also, particularly now, I think, even though we've just heard, they've kind of put their 2026 plans on hold, and hope like hell that that's just because they're tired and not for any other reason. But the fact that they've sort of come full circle now to kind of recognizing how important that brotherly bond was is kind of beautiful to me, even though I love all the one-liners that they've delivered.
Oh, there have been many.
The Barbs over the years.
There have been many. Yeah, I saw the story that you just mentioned. Keith Richards, I guess he's the one who's saying, I can't go out on a full tour anymore. And I'm thinking, wow, Keith is he's showing a moment that he's actually human. There's a point.
Over 80. I mean,
yeah, it's been an amazing run of album tours, massive tours, and you wonder how he's been able to do it. But Yeah, I'm with you. I hope everything is. Hopefully, it's just as simple as that, and they just got to slow down the touring schedule. We'll see. But
Yeah, which is a bummer for us because I was pretty hopeful that Australia was going to be back on the route for next year, but
I
doesn't
thought
look like it's going to happen.
I thought Hackney Diamonds was great. Pleasantly
Such a
surprised. Yeah,
such a brilliant album, and I think it was brilliant, and I think everybody fell madly in love with that record because it distilled the essence of what the Stones have always been, like the actual, you know, combination of sounds and their influences, and you could hear them in the studio on that record. You can hear them being loose and tight and kind of, you know, fitting the pieces of the puzzle together in each of those songs.
yeah, it really
And I
is.
think for that reason, you know, people just were like, yes, you know, this is to be making that kind of music in the 2020s is astonishing.
It's astonishing. It's. I mean, you miss Charlie. I mean, I know Charlie's on 2 tracks, but still, they're able to. They got Keith's drummer, his solo drummer, Steve Jordan.
Steve Jordan,
Steve
of
Jordan.
course.
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry, I had Expensive Winos in my head then instead of Rolling Stones. Yeah, Steve Jordan.
Yeah, but there is something to that fire and ice, that opposites the chemistry there creates something magical with these duos. Daltrey and Townsend, different people. Plant and Jimmy Page, you could say different. Yeah. Now Malcolm and Angus Young, that's an exception to the rule, but Axl and Slash, I mean, all of those are in the book. And with the exception of the Young brothers, it seems as if all great rock and roll partnerships are made of 2 people who just have a great chemistry, yet they can't really hang out as friends. You know, I mean, even Daltrey says that him and Townsend, they're not really friends. They never really hung out.
Well, I'm trying to think of another endeavor besides music where these people are literally living together, notwithstanding not being on tour. For now, we're talking 60 years. Like, who does that? Who can consistently not, you know, want to kill somebody that you've been annoyed by for 60 years? Because you're going to know every single little trigger that, you know, is going to drive you insane. So it speaks to the power of music, really, that these people kept on coming back together. They knew the alchemy of them as a unit was greater than you know, somebody messing up somebody's cup of tea order or you know,
Yeah.
throwing a guitar at somebody's head.
Right. And it took Mick Jagger to go solo and do okay. He had lukewarm results as a solo artist, although he's got some moments and I'm a fan of some of his stuff. And Keith did, I love his solo work, but neither on their own could do what the Stones could do. And they realized that. So they needed to kind of go their separate ways to understand that. And I think all of these duos have that understanding that, look, got to figure out a way to coexist.
Yeah, I mean, we've just had Oasis, you know.
Yeah, I was thinking of them. Yeah,
do the tour and sort of wind it up down this end of the planet. And it was interesting. A mate of mine who encountered their management had said that the managers were astonished that you know, Liam and Noel Gallagher were getting on famously on this tour. The band was really hitting their stride on this tour. And then had remarked that they even had breakfast that morning together without anyone organizing it.
Wow. How about that?
I know. But I'd love to have seen that contract because I reckon the lion's share of the payoff from that reunion tour would have been, you know, conditional on them A, finishing it, and B, you know, behaving themselves. Because I guess sometimes management and the team around need to you know, play the adult in the room to keep the juvenile delinquents from reverting to their natural condition.
Yeah. Do whatever it takes to keep that train on the tracks, man. Don't let this derail.
It'll be interesting to see what they do next, whether they just keep touring or decide to do new music.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, it is interesting though. They all of a sudden are back again as among the biggest earning tours in rock and roll. Now we have rock gods who are frontmen, and then we have rock gods who are guitarists, and we got Eric Clapton and Jimi Hendrix in the book.
In the same way that perhaps the songwriter artists like Lennon, Kurt Cobain, could completely take rock into a completely different direction. The Hendrix and Clapton focused on not so much, I don't think, what a song was as what the guitar could do, and then that led them to what a song or an album could be. And you think the electric guitar was such a new instrument then, so the limitless possibilities of what it could do, they were the first to unlock those. We all carry on now saying, I've heard that riff before, I've heard that song before, I've heard that chord progression before. They were doing it for the first time. And to summons those riffs, you just think about it as being, this instrument with strings and either wood or metal and plastic, and to just create these vibrations, these sonic vibrations that physically, there was a physical effect to them. You viscerally felt what they were playing. That was some kind of wizardry, I think. And I think both of them in that regard are probably more rock wizards than they are rock gods. I mean, I think Hendrix was definitely a rock god because of his performance, because of the way he challenged the status quo, because of his innate talent, but also how hard he worked at it. I just think there was something otherworldly about him, particularly when you look back and do your YouTube dive and check out some of those amazing performances at Montreux or at Woodstock, any of the legendary moments that were luckily captured forever on film.
The Booked on Rock podcast is part of the Boneless Podcasting Network. If you're a fan of classic rock and classic film like I am, go to boneless.lovable.app to find over 20 great shows there. That's boneless.lovable.app, or just go to bookedonrock.com, click on the logo. It'll take you right to the Boneless Podcasting Network. It is what you want it to be. Listen with confidence. Hendrix is the kind of guy like Jim Morrison, Kurt Cobain, who are in this book. It almost seems as if they were never even here in real flesh and blood. It's their mythical figures because they died so young. That's the other thing. How much to that is there? And when you think about a rock god, those who have passed away young.
I think particularly with Hendrix, and I think the same was true of Bon Scott. What would AC/DC have been like if Bon Scott had lived? But both of them dying in very similar circumstances in England after, binge drinking and ending up just dying so tragically. And you kind of think, all of those things could have been prevented, right? All of those things, there could have been a sliding door moment where, they'd been with people and been taken to hospital, whatever else. So there's that thing too, where you can't help but kind of freeze them in your mind in this kind of Peter Pan state of prime. They were literally at their prime when they died. And so when someone's, sort of frozen in that moment, not only do you intellectually start hypothesizing about, and we do it with Lennon all the time, what would they be like now? What would they have done? How would their career have moved? But there's also something kind of mystical, I think, about the fact that they're trapped in that moment and in time, that they lived fast, they produced amazing, life-changing, culture-shifting work, and yet they proved to be so fallibly human that you kind of want them a little bit up there, because but for the grace of God go all of us, I think.
And you never saw them grow old. You never had to see them on stage and people start saying, he just doesn't have it anymore. His voice isn't what it was, or he's not moving around as much as he was. Yeah, they're frozen in time as a young 27-year-old, or Bon Scott was 33, but just guys who were before their time. But one exception would be David Bowie, where here's a guy, he did live a fairly long life, but he managed to, like you point out in the book, he managed to have surprises up his sleeve right up until the end. I mean, literally right up until the end, right?
David Bowie was without a doubt my favorite chapter. I fell madly, madly in love with him again. I think probably like yourself, his death rocked me to the core, and the outpouring of, because I think his death, particularly that year, was just 2016 was just a hellish year for us to lose so many amazing, amazing artists. It was Bowie, Prince, George Martin died, George Michael died, Leonard Cohen was that year. It was one after the other, and his was the first. And to see the global shrines and coming together of thousands and thousands of people was astonishing. We'd never seen anything like this before. But I think when you look at his life and the, tentacles that he put out into the world across, from 69 until 2016 were just, they hit every pocket of the planet. I mean, there's no way that you could go into a karaoke place in Tokyo or Vietnam or Thailand and not have Heroes or Changes or Fame or any of those songs on there. So he kind of loomed large to me as the pinnacle of the rock god, as somebody who had such a formidable presence in pop culture, who shaped the zeitgeist every time he kind of put out an album. I mean, he took it somewhere that was unexpected. And you look at his influence now, I would hazard a guess, if we did a Google Trend search, we would find that there's probably more musicians on the planet right now who cite David Bowie as an influence than any other rock god on the planet. One of the interesting things that I discovered about Bowie, and I think, a lot of people have come to find out about him since his passing, was just how damn funny he was. Like, the emails that he would send people. Brian Eno has shared a lot of them. Dave Grohl had a famous one where he was working on, I think he played, Foo Fighters and Dave Grohl both played at Bowie's 50th big concert at Madison Square Garden. I think that was about 97 maybe. And it was 97. And he then followed up sort of several years later wanting him to sing on this song that he was working on for a Marvel movie. So sent off an email thinking, nothing would come of it. Bowie replies and says, yeah, I like the instrumental, but that kind of film, that kind of song, not really my deal. So thanks, but no thanks. Grohl writes back going, oh my God, David Bowie is emailing me like, thank you, don't want to take up too much of your time, take care. Bowie sends back, well, now that that's settled, F off. And Grohl's just like, David Bowie told me to F off. It's like,
That's awesome.
And they're all, all these people came out with these. He would email fans who
Really?
had somehow, yeah, he would invite them into the studios in New York if there was somebody milling around, and he liked the cut of their jib, up into the studio for an hour or so watching the man at work. I mean, God, I wish I'd been one of those fans.
Right? Yeah.
Could you imagine it?
Yeah, that last album is fantastic.
Yeah, Black Star, but so heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Viewed through the prism of him knowing, he was about to die.
Hey guys, we'll get back to the show, but first I want to tell you about an exclusive deal for Booked on Rock listeners. Get 15% off any purchase at oldglory.com. Over 300,000 officially licensed items covering music, sports, entertainment, and pop culture. Merchandise featuring legendary music artists like Bob Marley, The Beatles, Grateful Dead, Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, and many, many more. Go to oldglory.com. Make sure to use the promo code BookedOnRock. Also find a link in this episode's show notes, or just go to bookedonrock.com and click on My Deals. Kathy McCabe is the author of the new book, Rock Gods, Icons of Rock Music. Freddie Mercury, his story may be the most interesting of them all. A rock god while he was alive, but you could say he became even bigger as a rock god after his death. While he was alive, you say that it was Freddie's pursuit of pleasure and desire to shock that guaranteed his indelible place in music history. Talk about why you include Freddie in the book. I'm assuming that was not a difficult decision to make, right?
I love Freddie Mercury. Another one who, frozen in time, died at 45 and so tragically from HIV/AIDS. I don't think there's ever been anyone like Freddie in terms of Bowie actually kind of did steer the rock ship into sort of the queer culture, playing the camp card, things like that, being very theatric, being very, almost Broadway to a certain degree. But that voice, I mean, I don't know if you've ever, gone down the rabbit hole of finding those kind of, isolated vocals of Freddie.
Yes.
It's astonishing. It's just so pure, and the way that he made it look effortless. He made it sound effortless while he looked like he was making great effort in his performance. I always found incredibly captivating. Like he wanted to connect with the audience. It wasn't so much that he was doing it, playing these amazing kind of Mozart, classical piano, pieces. He wasn't doing it for himself. He was doing it as a conduit to unite people. And that seemed to underpin a lot of who Freddie was. I mean, he was incredibly indulgent, and I wouldn't say selfish, because the people around him said he was incredibly generous and big open arms to humanity and to those that he loved. But the fact that he, I just have in my head on a constant loop that performance at Live Aid where Queen, just that moment in time affirmed their legacy, and I think, set it up for the fact that we've still got the best of Queen volumes 1 to probably 17 or whatever it is out there. They're still on the chart.
I often wonder what could have been if they, for whatever reason, say they just didn't show up to Live Aid, whatever.
Oh,
how history would have changed.
Yeah, because they'd gone off the boil a bit on the charts at that stage.
Sure.
And so kind of being invited to do, a 20-minute slot was a big deal. And they filled every second of it with just this power and just aura that still gives me goosebumps every time I look at it. absolutely, without a doubt, one of the greatest showmen that ever walked the planet.
I love that Malcolm is in there with Angus Young, because Malcolm, a lot of people don't know, unless you're a really hardcore AC/DC fan, he is so important to the AC/DC sound, which I'm assuming, is that why you wanted to put the brothers together rather than just Angus? Because maybe most would just go with Angus because he's the guy. You see, he's the, he's the face of the band.
There's no AC/DC without Malcolm. There never could have been. I mean, he was the one who was noodling away on the guitar in the bedroom while, the fans of their brother George were screaming on the front yard in Western Sydney, a couple of suburbs away from where I am now. And Angus was just trying to be as good as him. But the interesting thing was they deviated in their paths of how they wanted to play and how they wanted to construct music. And that was Malcolm went rhythm and Angus went lead. And that, I guess that kind of happened naturally as brothers would, sitting in a bedroom jamming. Well, you're not going to want to play exactly the same thing together. You're going to want to sort of play off each other and inspire and push each other. But Malcolm was the captain of that band, the general, the little general, I think was one of the nicknames that he had. People came and went in that band because Malcolm wanted them to go. He had absolutely no qualms about changing the lineup when he felt that there'd been a clash of personality or somebody wasn't lifting their weight or were going through some tough times themselves with drugs and alcohol. I mean, he famously took himself off for about 8 to 10 months, when the drinking got the better of him and started affecting his playing. And that was the first time Stevie Young, their nephew, joined the band, who now, is permanently there as Malcolm's replacement.
That was in 86, I think, 1986 on the Blow Up Your Video tour.
Yeah. And it's like, obviously the two of them stopped to have a conversation after Bond's death. Do we carry on? Do we fold the band? And it was Bon Scott's family who insisted that he would have wanted them to continue. So, they did their secret auditions, found Brian Johnson, and the rest is history. I saw them a couple of weeks ago here, and despite the fact that there's been, the usual social media pile-on about, perhaps they're not at their best anymore, I took a friend who'd never seen them before, and he was just completely wowed. I saw 9-year-old girls with their little flashing horns and their mouths just dropped watching this complete explosion of guitars, drums, and bass, and Johnson doing the best he can with the voice that he's got at his age, 78, I think. And I just don't understand why you would begrudge them doing what they're doing when they're able to do it.
I'm with you. They can do it as long as they want. If nobody's forcing the fans to go, you don't have to buy a ticket.
Well, and it's not the fans who are leading this, time to hang it up call. It's people who haven't even been to the gig who are watching, the dodgy concert footage that we all take on our phones. I mean, it just seems if you're there, the electricity of it is, you can't argue that is worth the price of admission.
Yeah, that's the times we're in now. Everybody's putting up footage online. It's certainly not even close to the same thing. Like you said, it's an experience when you're there. That's great to hear. The younger generation is still loving AC/DC. What's not to love, right? I mean, the songs are just, they hook you in and they never let you go.
And that's the thing about rock music too, I think, and it was notwithstanding, the artists that we've lost, there is this, inexplicable refreshing of the generations with rock music that I think happens far more with this genre than it does with pop or even hip hop. It seems almost to be a rite of passage that, particularly for young Australians, that, guys turn 13, the testosterone kicks in and they're rating their parents' AC/DC records.
Oh, that's awesome.
Or In Excess or Midnight Oil or Cold Chisel or whichever. And then, Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, whoever from overseas. And they become real students of the music. They like to dive down the rabbit hole and find, more music, find, interesting information. They're real students of it. And I don't see that happening as much with pop music. Maybe Michael Jackson, but not to the same degree that it does with all of the rock acts.
You're right. Interesting to see what happens regarding Michael. The movie's coming out on Michael. So we'll see what that does for his body work, because there's a guy who was just what he could do is, we had in the 80s Prince, Michael Jackson, Madonna. It's so many huge stars, Whitney Houston. It's amazing how many people, the greatest artists, performers of all time in that decade.
Yeah, but and you sort of see it, I guess, around, anniversaries and things like that. You'll see, a spike that'll happen in streaming or on the charts where a bit of back catalogue will go back. But you look at AC/DC, they held their music off streaming services until 2015. They only went on iTunes in 2012. So they held out. Now they've got 3 songs that are over 2 billion. Thunderstruck, Highway to Hell, Back in Black. I think You Shook Me All Night Long's 1.5 billion.
Yeah, it's got to be up there.
So, there's what? The Weeknd, Ed Sheeran, Taylor Swift, Adele, a bunch of others who are, Drake and Kendrick, who have 3 billion, 2 billion, multiple tracks. But I can't think of another rock act that's got that many tracks that have hit that Spotify ceiling of over 2 billion.
And they're everywhere. You go to sporting events, you hear Thunderstruck and Back in Black, and
Thunderstruck would have to be the most played sports highlights package song of all time.
Yeah, so many people.
I would put money on that.
Yeah, so many people know it right away as soon as you hear it. Hey guys, thanks so much for checking out the Booked on Rock podcast. If you've just found the podcast, welcome. If you've been listening, thank you so much for your support. And make sure you tell a friend, a family member, share on social media, and let people know about Booked on Rock. And if you do like the podcast, make sure you subscribe, give a 5-star review wherever you listen to the Booked on Rock podcast. We're on Amazon, Apple, iHeart, Spotify, Spreaker, TuneIn, and on YouTube Music. You can check out the full episodes on video, along with video highlights from episodes on the Booked on Rock YouTube channel. Find it at Booked on Rock. Thanks again for listening. Now back to the show. We talked about Springsteen earlier. Just one thing to add that's I find fascinating with him. He's a rock god, yet at the same time, he's known as the everyman, which he may be the only person in this book that you could say that, right? He could relate to the audience. Like, he's the kind of guy you could almost see in the audience as among the fans, yet he is a rock god in the sense where when he's on stage, he really can lift everybody up. You just elevate to, it's almost like a religious experience when you're at his concert, You're
going to the Boss Church, definitely. It's telling that he still lives in New Jersey, don't you think? I think that's the key to it. He probably lived, I'm sure he did live in LA for a bit.
Yeah. Late 80s, early 90s, and said, yeah, you know what? This ain't for me. I'm going back home. Because he says there in New Jersey, people treat him like a normal person for the most part. Rarely people come up and treat him like a rock god. Most people are just like, hey, Bruce, what's up? Hey.
He got up at the Stone Pony the other night, I think, one night last week. But I think that says a lot, because I think that's what gave him his raison d'etre in terms of what he wanted to write about, because those characters, I mean, I don't know the history of New Jersey intimately, but I imagine that there were a lot of tough times in terms of, changing industries and employment and just sort of families struggling to survive in suburban America. And so his microcosm, what he was seeing around him was a microcosm of that. But he also tapped into that grapes of wrath, that sort of same over that elevated the life of the everyman, of the suburban guy, of the guy just trying to put food on the table for his family. And he made it a noble existence, which I thought, that was one of the strongest pulls of his music to everyone. When everyone's singing it out, at one of his shows, they're singing out their story too. But it's remarkable that he's been able to do that consistently now for 50 years. It's extraordinary.
Yeah, there's a book that came out recently, a woman who went to several of Bruce's shows in Australia, lifted her out of a depression. And she wasn't even a fan all that much. It was just that her daughter happened to have tickets and she said, yeah, I guess I'll go. And it changed her life.
I have to say, in my teens, absolutely loved Born in the USA album, thought that was extraordinary. I mean, obviously that arrived as MTV was starting to change everything in terms of pop culture and the immediacy of it, and putting, these stars into our lounge rooms. But I'd gone to see him, would have been around that time. So it would have been 84 when he played Australia. And that was one of those marathon shows and it was fantastic. But I kind of then missed him. He didn't really come here as regularly. But when he started coming back full on, which would have been around 2000 and I want to say 13, probably would have been around then. And I went up to Brisbane for the kickoff of the tour. And I sat next to a bunch of diehard Springsteen fans. And I was like, I'm not going to know every song he's going to play over this 3-hour plus thing. Can you guys help me out? Their enthusiasm and their, just expert knowledge and everything else just made everything so heightened, and just, you just felt like you'd just been adopted into some kind of Bruce Springsteen, world family. And I had to live tweet that gig because it was so significant that he hadn't been in Australia for so long. And suddenly, like in the middle of the show, I'm trying to, write the review in my head, live tweet what songs he's playing and double checking with the guy sitting next to me. And suddenly it's like, hi from Amsterdam, hi from New York, hi from LA, hi from London, hi from Germany. And just people all over the world, were aware of this gig and were kind of monitoring this gig in real time via social media. It blew my mind how connected that community was. I'd never experienced anything like it. And the fact, in the middle of it is this guy in tight blue jeans and a vest and a shirt, and dabbing himself with a sponge every 10 minutes because he's absolutely, running a marathon up there with a band that, has got to be the best, sidekick band in the history of rock and roll. You kind of just go, where have you been all my life, Bruce? It's like, and luckily he's come back a couple of times since that, because he realized, Australia was really underdone for him, and that tour was so huge and so successful that he was like, "Oh, okay, these are my people. Let's go down there when the sun's shining and you guys are in the depths of winter."
Right. Similar is Bono with that type of experience in concert. You go to a U2 show and it's Bono that really has that. He has that charisma and he has that ability to have the audience in the palm of his hands. And you write, straddles the spheres of music, politics, and philanthropy on a mission to convince everyone songs can change the world.
He's kind of evangelical to a certain degree, which I think has got him a little offside with his bandmates at times, when I imagine they probably were frustrated about what was U2 versus what is Bono, the activist. And he's caught a lot of grief for that. But then when you look at the achievements of Red and the One organization, I mean, they have actually, made huge differences to in the realms of poverty, in the realms of education, disease eradication in Africa in particular. I think, some of their programs that they've done on malaria and alongside the Gates Foundation on polio has pretty much eradicated the disease from the planet. But that band came along at a time when I think, you had pop and it was all escapist and bright and neon, courtesy of MTV over here. And then you had this gritty, sort of urgent, very militaristic drums and a very different sonic palette for the guitar from The Edge. And then this loudmouth frontman who dared you to stand there not doing or saying or thinking anything. I think the way that Bono challenged the audience got you to the top, but then became the very source of the backlash against them, which, we've seen what we call the tall poppy syndrome in Australia. We've seen that, fell many a great rock star because people just started thinking that they were, bigger than their boots, as they say down here. But the way he sings, the desire for more, for better, for hope to mean something, I think all those things underpin great rock music.
Prince. Rock gods can be mysterious, none more than Prince. That's part of what makes him a rock god, do you think?
Yeah. I remember he was down here. I think it was around, it wasn't Diamonds and Pearls, it might have been the tour after that. And there was an after party. And people were like, told, oh, when he comes into the room, you're not allowed to look at him. And I was like,
the classic
kidding?
Rock star thing. You can't look at him.
You can't look at him. No eye contact. So of course, me being a brat, there's Prince walking there. And then, went and stood at the edge of the dance floor while he was dancing and watched him. No one, a very big security man did try and stand in front of me at one stage, but I kept on doing this business to get around him. One of the highlights of my career as a music journalist was just before he was coming here for Piano and the Microphone tour, the last tour of his life. On the Friday, a friend of mine who was the publicist for the promoter rings me up and says, you have 5 minutes to send 5 questions for Prince. Now, he didn't do interviews. He very, very rarely did interviews. And I'm like, this is a man I could ask 100 questions of, and you're giving me 5 minutes to come up with 5. And she's like, you've now got 4 minutes, 30 seconds. You better hurry up.
Clock is ticking.
Oh my God. And it's like, she said, we've got to get them over to him. He wants to do them now. So I bashed out my 5 questions and he emailed back and he had the 2s and the B's and the U's and every I was spelled EYE because that's when he was doing that particular project. And it was absolutely one of the highlights of my career. You know, the next morning I'm sitting at brunch and I get a text going, email in your inbox. And I'm just reading it, shaking, going, Prince wrote these words. Wow. I know. And it was beautiful. You know, he was talking about why the show was a love letter to his father, who he'd had a fractious relationship with because his father was a very, you know, famous jazz musician and was very exacting and, you know, wasn't exactly the most encouraging dad of a kid who, you know, wanted to be like him, who wanted to be a star. But like Bowie, his ability to reinvent, to challenge, and to also take on the industry and the way it was changing deserves to be absolutely applauded. I mean, it's quite interesting that they were two opposites of the internet coin, because Bowie saw the power in the internet before anybody else introduced those Bowie bonds in the late 1990s. He said how it was going to change not only just popular culture, but all culture. Whereas Prince really didn't like the fact that music, you know, in 2010, he didn't want his music to be on streaming because he said, you know, I don't want to give it away for free. It's valuable. It has value. We should treat it as such. So it's interesting how they came at the internet from very polar views.
I remember Prince, when he was touring, he was selling his new albums as a package deal when you bought the ticket to his show. So he was trying different things to try to get people to listen to his new music, not just buy it.
That was with musicology, and he was also a bit of a cheeky businessman too, because while the labels were all trying to push him to, you know, get with the internet program and you know, make the music available for downloads and then later streaming, he did a deal. Can't remember which paper it was. I think it might have been the Daily Mirror in the UK, where, you know, you used to get the CDs stuck onto the front page as part of a package deal. And so, you know, he went back instead of going to the future. He was like, well, I'm going to stick this in newspapers and make sure it gets in every household.
Find the Booked on Rock website at bookedonrock.com. There you can find all the back episodes of the show, the latest episode in video and audio, links to all of the platforms where you can listen to the podcast, plus all the social media platforms. We're on Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and X. Also, check out the Booked on Rock blog, find your local independent bookstore, find out all the latest hot rock book releases, and before you go, check out the Booked on Rock online store. Pick up some Booked on Rock merch. It's all at bookedonrock.com. Michael Hutchence of INXS. So glad you have Michael Hutchence in this book, because he seems to be forgotten, at least here in the States. He's not talked about that much, and it's a disappointment, because he was so charismatic and what a voice and a presence. Talk about what led you to including him in the book.
I'm Australian.
I sensed the connection there. So what is it in Australia? Is he talked about still a lot? Because here in the States, it's like, don't you guys remember, man, INXS? I mean, they were huge here in the States in the 80s and into the 90s.
Yeah, I mean, Kick in 87, you know, well, I mean, Listen Like Thieves had kind of set this stage with What You Need, but Kick with Need You Tonight and then Devil Inside. I mean, no other band in the world was doing what they were doing in terms of, you know, marrying rock with funk in that way. But again, that sinewy kind of, you know, sexuality that he had on stage was like, you watch the Wembley, the famous Live at Wembley concert, and he's just absolutely in his powers there. I mean, He was also, I guess, a victim of coming up in an era where being a rock god also made you a celebrity. And, you know, he was chased by paparazzi, you know, obviously when in that ill-fated relationship between him and Paula Yates, um, you know, he couldn't cope with that. That was, and before that, you know, Helena Christensen um and you know, who's part of that kind of celebrity cult of the supermodel and the rock star. There was a lot of that happening in the 90s as well. But Michael was one of those people that was very un-rock star when you were in his presence. He was very engaged in humans. He wanted to know everything about you in 5 minutes, and then he would find the one thing that you shared in common, and you would talk about that for hours. And then the next time you saw him, you know, him and I bonded over our dads and the influence of our dads in our lives, and had some beautiful conversations along those kind of lines. But he was fun in that rock god way. He was naughty. He liked to push the limits, and I think, you know, that obviously was his undoing in the end. But it's interesting that that In Excess hasn't sort of, I mean, in Australia, they aren't talked about a lot because there was a lot of activity to kind of reclaim the legacy, because they did that sort of foray into, you know, that rock star reality show.
Television show, yeah.
Yeah, which was done by Mark Burnett, the same guy who does Survivor. And, you know, found the front man, and that kind of worked as an experiment. But, you know, they'd already gone through a few different iterations with different singers. John Stevens, down here, Terence Trent D'Arby even sang with them
that's
at one
right.
stage. Yeah. So they have kind of been in the zeitgeist here because there was a miniseries, there's been a couple of documentaries. So they've kind of had a presence in Australia. But yeah, that hasn't really translated overseas. It'd be interesting to see how you could do that, how you could kind of resurrect their legacy, because certainly, you know, the X album was even bigger than Kick in the UK. I mean, Suicide Blonde and those songs were enormous. But I mean, Kick was such a monster record. And that was the record that Atlantic rejected. They wanted to pay the band and their manager, Chris Murphy, $1 million not to release it.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Why? They didn't like the songs?
Said didn't like the songs, didn't hear a hit, absolutely dismissed it, totally dismissed it. So Murphy fought with them, and what he did, he finally got them to release it. And what he cleverly did was he did his own indie promo radio campaign, focused on college radio, and got them into colleges. And that's what made it all blow up in the States.
That's shocking to hear because those songs are so infectious. I mean, I can't even imagine why you would even think there's no hit there, but yeah, they proved them wrong, obviously.
There was a guy at Decca who didn't sign the Beatles, so, you know.
Right, that's the famous story, of course. Well, there's a Tom Petty with Full Moon Fever. MCA was like, nah, I don't hear anything here. Really? Okay. And then I think they got some new people in at MCA, and then I think the success of the Traveling Wilburys album said, okay, let's capitalize and let's go with this Full Moon Fever thing, and it became the biggest album of his career, you know. Axl and Slash in the book. Anthony Kiedis of the Red Hot Chili Peppers in there. Kurt Cobain, Dave Grohl. Those are the final four. Kiedis represents rock and roll contradiction. Can you expand on that?
Peace, love, and mung beans in terms of an aesthetic, and yet, you know, for a lot of years there, it was likely that he wasn't going to live. I mean, his battles with addiction were horrendous. I mean, he was introduced to drugs when he was 12, when he went to live with his father in LA. there's there's something fascinating to me about Kiedis in that he's such a polarizing figure. People either love or hate him. They're not ambivalent about him at all. And that's kind of, that is a rock god to a large degree. I mean, well, you and I can agree on loving X amount of people. Like Jim Morrison, I'm not a fan. I'm writing the chapter on Jim Morrison, made me even less of a fan, because I felt I felt the indulgence, the talent didn't write the check for the indulgence. I think there was a lack of balance there. Whereas Kiers, and particularly in Australia, I'm not sure if it's the same in the US, the Red Hot Chili Peppers have always had such a huge following here, and their music's been omnipresent on the charts, on the airwaves. I mean, you literally cannot walk into a shopping center without hearing a Red Hot Chili Peppers song. So to that end, there is absolutely an argument to be made that they are a great rock band, and Kiedis is a great rock frontman. I mean, certainly, in terms of performance, he's captivating. He's unique. The wordplay is astonishing, sort of taking rap into the rock realm, as the band did. But yeah, he is a contradiction, because he seems to, a life philosophy sometimes didn't match up to perhaps the actions of the way he treated his bandmates, or how he abdicated his responsibilities as a frontman. So, that's a story you see a lot.
But the Red Hot Chili Peppers definitely, I would say, as big here in the States from early 90s with Blood, Sugar, Sex, Magic, right up into the early 2000s. They were just heavyweight. They're just one of the heavyweight rockers. Anytime they put out an album, you're going to hear so many singles from the album. It was just a given. It's as with,
and the last ones haven't been so bad.
The album that they put out that had it's a Danger Mouse that produced it, I believe.
Yeah.
Fantastic. One last question I have for you was Dave Grohl, because I thought that was interesting. Kurt Cobain's in there. Not surprised by that. But yeah, you say here's an example that lightning strikes twice.
I mean, there's very few people in the rock god realm who have had phenomenal success twice. I mean, it just doesn't really happen. So for that reason, and it's also, he's another one of those who was definitely born to do it. Whether it was play drums, guitar, sing, whatever, he was born to do music. And there's something fascinating to me about charting the course of someone who, as a young boy, goes, that's the thing I want to do, and makes it real. After Kurt's death, it would be absolutely acceptable to crawl into a hole and contemplate, next moves and whatever else. And he just, like AC/DC, and he probably did take a leaf out of their book with that, went straight into the next thing. There's something to be said about somebody whose vision is clear. Like, there's never any doubt that he is the leader of that band, and what they do next is at his instigation. So the fact, again, that he's also continued the band after the loss of, Taylor Hawkins, that would have been such a tough call, because, best mates and the drummer brotherhood and everything else. But he has a vision for the band, and I think he feels compelled to continue with it.
Any names that were on the bubble that you're kind of like, maybe? I'm a huge Van Halen fan, so that's why I'm curious. Was David Lee Roth almost on the list? Was Eddie?
That was a hard one, because who do you choose?
Right.
And they weren't really a partnership. So if I was to do rock guitar gods, Eddie would definitely be on there. I mean, I really wrestled with McCartney, whether to make Lennon and McCartney.
Yeah, Lennon and McCartney.
And I adore Paul McCartney, but I think in terms of what I think about rock, I think Lennon, and I think pop to a certain degree about McCartney.
Yeah. Interesting point.
That was one that I did wrestle a lot with. There were a bunch of Australians, but we wanted the book to be obviously not too Australian, so it could find its way to rock fans in other parts of the world. But like somebody like Jimmy Barnes from Cold Chisel down here would have been absolutely in there. Midnight Oil, Peter Garrett would have been absolutely in there. Probably with Rob Hurst.
Wasn't Jimmy Barnes in the running for AC/DC's singer spot when Bon Scott passed away?
He was in the running for another band, and it's just gone straight out of my head. And they asked him just as he was starting his solo career, and he decided, no, God, I've forgotten who the band. It was an American band.
It was, huh? Okay.
Yeah.
Jimmy Barnes.
It was in his book.
Oh my God. He revealed he was asked to join Van Halen in the mid 1980s after David Lee Roth left, but he declined the offer to focus on his solo career. He also reportedly declined an offer to join Deep Purple.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. All right, there you go. Okay. Wow, this is great. Yeah, Kathy,
I don't think he has regrets.
No, I don't think so. Rock Gods, Icons of Rock Music out now, right? You can find it wherever books are sold. Look for it at your nearest bookstore. If you want to find your nearest independent bookstore, go to bookedonrock.com and see if you can get a copy there. And where can people find you online, Kathy?
I'm on Instagram as McCabe Radar and TikTok as well.
Okay, so I'm going to follow you there. I'm going to seek you out and follow you, and I'll put the links in the show notes so people can reach out to you if they'd like. Thank you so much, Kathy, again for doing this, and hopefully we'll have you back on again in the future with some more books like this, man. This was a fun read.
Well, thanks, Eric. I absolutely enjoyed our chat.
That's it. It's in the books.